I'm Rendan, and this is The French Dispatch.
It began as a holiday. Eager to escape a bright future on the Great Plains, Arthur Howitzer Jr. transformed the series of travelogue columns.
We all know and love Wes Anderson. He's made some great films, from the charmingly wonderful Grand Budapest Hotel to the surprisingly intimate, well-done Moonrise Kingdom, and so many more. People love him, I think he's a great filmmaker, so regardless of his last film, Isle of Dogs, being something of a dud for me, I was gonna see this regardless, especially since it's an anthology film, which was new and different for Wes Anderson.
Berenson, Sazerac, Kremens, Roebuck Wright. These were his people.
Just try to make it sound like you wrote it that way on purpose.
It opens with a short but entertaining story from Owen Wilson, who introduces us to this world. There's a story about the commercialization of art. There's another about teenage unrest. And finally, there's a story about immigrants. And that's my favorite one. The last one. Across all these stories, the one thing that remains consistent is Wes Anderson's trademark style. He has the colorful props and that symmetrical production design coupled with the really mannered cinematography, and it makes up for a lot that I didn't like in this. I think that works supremely well once again. It's just his style and it works. But all of this pales in comparison to the best aspect of the movie, which is the choreography and the coordination on display in every scene. There are some scenes that are just a few seconds long where walls will peel back, characters, actors have to hit specific marks, the camera's moving to a set point, and all of it happens in just a few seconds, and it's really well done and impressive. That's the best aspect of this by far. To me, anthology movies have always been like rap mixtapes. They're not particularly high concept, but they don't need to be. As long as you've got bangers from back to front, then that is great, and that's all I want. Unfortunately for The French Dispatch, this mixtape is not bangers from back to front like I had hoped. The quality ranges, not dramatically, albeit, but it ranges enough to where I wonder what the point of it all is. The shell story is about Bill Murray, the editor of The French Dispatch, going and talking to the writers of The French Dispatch, and that's what kind of keeps us in the loop with what's going on. He ends up dead at the end of the film, which we find out at the beginning of the film. There's a scene when the writers are all trying to write his obituary all at once, and they immediately stall after a couple of lines and start talking or arguing amongst themselves. This scene feels like it's important to understanding what's going on, and yet I don't know what he's trying to say. I don't know what Wes Anderson wants us to take away from this movie on the whole based on this anthology and this shell story. It seems like maybe he's trying to say without an editor pushing an artist, then the art could go off the rails. It seems like that could be something he's trying to say. To be clear, I don't know if that is, and I'm not even sure that that's correct. It's just something that it made me think about, is art edited by somebody? Maybe you need somebody to push you as an artist. But if that's the case, then that's actually an interesting little thesis statement for the rest of the film. Art being off the rails, that is. It's such a messy experience, and not just because the shorts range in quality, but because of some of the technical choices. Much like Isle of Dogs, Wes Anderson's last feature, there's major presentation choices here that are kind of questionable. They don't actively ruin the experience, and they're a little nitpicky, I'll admit, but whenever they happened, I found myself thinking more about that than I was about the movie, which is not a great thing. One of them is the aspect ratio shifting between 1.37 to 1 to 2.39 to 1, I think it's basically just cutting from a box to widescreen or letterboxed. And I don't know why. It happens seemingly at random sometimes, or other times it just seems to show more of the setting around the characters. I don't know why it did that, but it does. And there's also this bizarre color shifting going on. Most of the movie's filmed in black and white, other than the modern parts of the film. Whenever it's telling the story, it's in black and white, except for when it's not. There are a handful of times when it shifts to color for reasons I don't fully understand. There's a couple of times when it seems to work okay, like when a kid asks Saoirse Ronan what her eye color is, and she says it's blue, and then it shows in color that her eyes are blue. Stuff like that adds a little bit of a punch to the visuals, but more times than not, that punch is lessened by me just actively wondering why these decisions were made.
You're fired.
Really?
Don't cry in my office.
All in all, all, that's The French Dispatch, a mixtape of Wes Anderson and his career leading up to this point, which this movie, I think, does a good job of encapsulating. You see some impressive growth from his first movie to this one in terms of his style and what that brings to the table with his impressive camera movements, his coordinated sets, his super symmetrical way of thinking, and the performances here are great as well. There's a lot to like about this. It's one I think I appreciate more than I like, though. It was a bit underwhelming. It was a bit disappointing. There's some standout sequences, like, for example, when Benicio del Toro is wheeling after Adrian Brody, trying to throw things at him. I love that little sequence. But there's also more than a handful of sequences that just didn't work for me. There's one too many Frances McDormand scenes where she reads a manifesto with the youth for me in this. Every time I wanted to get involved with one of the stories, it felt like it moved out of it as soon as I was starting to get involved with it. So I just didn't connect with this plot or this story, or even really a bunch of these characters. It's just a technical achievement, and that's kind of where it stops for me. I'll give it a 7. It's still good, it's just a little underwhelming.